Stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority.
Can I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee? As Chair of the Transport Committee, I've agreed to call this meeting as a matter of urgency in order to hold a formal meeting relating to car clubs in London, Zipcar's December 2025 announcement, in accordance with Section 100B 4B of the Local Government Act 1972. Can I ask our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from the Deputy Chairman, Assemblymember Toyle, Assemblymember Garrett and Assemblymember Prince. Apologies also received from Assemblymember McCartney, for whom Assemblymember Clark is substituting, and from Assemblymember Desai, for whom Assemblymember Harani is substituting.
Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the recommendation set out at item 3 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Noted? Do you want to do that now?
I will. I'll do it now, and I'll do it at the. Yes, I'll just keep declaring. It is on my register of interest that I'm a member of Zipcar, a Zipcar user, and I also signed an open letter that was coordinated by Richard Dilks about the Zipcar issue.
Thanks very much, and we'll come on to that in a bit. And can I ask the committee to note the outstanding actions arising from its previous meetings? And we now move on to our main item of business, which is a discussion on car clubs in London, following the announcement that Zipcar is to close its UK operations at the end of this month. For our first panel, we are joined remotely by Richard Dilks, the Chief Executive of Como UK. Welcome, Richard. Welcome, Richard. Thank you so much for being with us at such short notice. So we've just got a few questions for you. I'll start and then I'll hand over to some other Assembly members. Can you tell us what your assessment is of why Zipcar has announced this decision to cease operations, particularly in London?
Sure, can you hear me okay, just to check?
Yeah. We can, yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks for having me on remotely. There's a number of reasons here, so I'll go through them. I think overall our reaction as the national body for shared transport was one of shock, which I think is widely shared across London stakeholders, but also far from complete surprise, unfortunately. And I think the committee's done some very helpful work here with its report earlier this year, so I don't think at this point we need to hash that ground over again. But essentially, Zipcar is a large-scale microcosm example of how London's operating environment for Car Club has not been working well for some time and is now really not working well. So into the factors, we have some national ones, which I'll start with, and then some London-specific ones, in my view. So at national level, we have an economy that is still not showing much growth. There's not much buoyancy out there, so consumers feel financially pinched still and have done for quite a long time now. That flows through for demand for all sorts of things, but definitely includes Car Club. We have insurance. You can see from Zipcar's accounts that insurance has been an increasing cost for them. They self-insure, so they're relatively protected from this compared to say, small rural car clubs outside London. But nonetheless, it is making an impact there, and that is true across the country. We have cost issues around electric vehicles. Been through a lot of this in detail with the committee's previous work, so just briefly, the car club sector has a much higher percentage of EVs than the general car fleet, and that is something it wants to have more of, not less of. But we are seeing this percentage of EVs in the car club fleet drop nationally. And we did some depth research into this, which illustrates why they are significantly more expensive to operate than petrol or hybrid cars, sadly. And that cost gap has grown in recent years. So this has come from being an area of optimism and opportunity, say 5 years ago, relatively small percentages of EVs in the fleet, through an era then of continued hope that the cost picture would improve. And then actually in the last 2-3 years in particular, I would say the cost picture around EVs actually getting much worse, and therefore sending us backwards, 35% of the fleet down to 30%. And we'll see what it is when we measure it again quite soon. And then I think moving to the London-specific areas, we have got the fees charged, permit fees, but there are other fees now being charged as well by boroughs. There's huge variation in this. You'd expect some. It's a borough by borough basis, the way it's done in London, of course, which is dysfunctional, but it is where we are. You'd expect some variation between, say, central London and outer London. But the variation we see goes far beyond that. It goes between like-for-like boroughs as well. So that in some boroughs, the playing field is at a roughly appropriate level or something within distance of it compared to other costs. A particularly relevant comparison point here is, of course, residential parking permit costs. But other boroughs where it is huge multiples of that cost and has just gone too high. Because it's a borough by borough approach, this fragmented sort of landscape, no one has a grip on what those overall costs are. No one borough does, London Councils doesn't, Transport for London doesn't, the GLA doesn't, the Mayor Office and so on. It's actually only operators that are exposed to that. But when you end up in a position as London has, of huge over-reliance on one operator, and we now see just the start of the impacts of that operator, one must presume, going, it's actually that operator which is, of course, bearing the vast bulk of those fees. And then at the same time, we have TfL's congestion charge changes, the ones from approximately 2 years ago, changing hours. That was a significant additional cost to the sector. And then the ones which start in just a few days' time in January, which we've estimated to be around £1 million additional cost to the sector. Again, because of Zipcar's huge dominance of circa 90%, they would have been bearing, one must presume, the vast bulk of those too. So in essence, costs up, mix of London specific and national, demand soft, difficult. So it's not that operators can simply pass these costs on to consumers. And in any case, in the big picture, even if they did do that, which they demonstrably have not been doing and not been felt able to do. But of course, that has an impact. That tilts the cost of using Car Club. It tilts it upwards, makes it less attractive, and then makes other options look more attractive. And I think it's really important to bear in mind when we're talking about other options here, the one we're talking about very largely is the private car. We will not, in my estimation, see a big switch from Zipcar users into other sustainable transport modes off the back of their presumed departure. Now, I think instead what we'll see is a significant shift to private car. We've been running a story share function on our website, just collecting anecdotal stories and some light touch data. And we've had about 70 responses so far to a question we pose on there, which is, what are you going to do now, particularly about car ownership? And it's over 80% of those respondents who say they're either thinking about getting another car or confirming to us that they will get one. I shouldn't say another car, sorry, I mean getting a car, a private car. Even if that figure is miles too high when extrapolated across London, it's incredibly worrying, and it doesn't surprise us based on all our years of research. So I think a lot of different threads through this story. There may well be others that I haven't picked out here.
Thanks very much. That's a really, really useful introduction and overview. What do you think this decision says about the longer-term viability of car clubs in London?
I think if we, and I mean we really collectively, Coma UK, anyone else who is really in the position of wanting to see car sharing, other sustainable modes do well in London, I think if we don't secure some changes off the back of this crisis, I don't see a very bright future for it, because the existing ecosystem has in effect just failed. And without some changes to some key issues, fees, bays, wider policies, sure have a big impact here. I haven't gone back over the ground. We covered with the committee's inquiry about the Mayor's transport strategy, etc. But all those points remain. All the recommendations from the committee's own report remain unaddressed at this point. So if we don't get some shifts, I don't think we can presume that there is viability for car sharing services in London, given what's just happened. But there is a positive side to this, which I think is that this is a huge wake-up call in our view, and if that is listened to and acted on, then there is a real opportunity to improve things. There are, after all, hundreds of thousands of Zipcar members currently in this city. That has implications to how their family, friends, loved ones, households travel around as well. It's not just about the number of members. There's a wider pool of people, using it, or it's impacting their lives. So demand has been there, and you can just see from the individual stories we've gathered and lots of other examples of it across the web and so on, how much this impacts people. That's for reasons. That's because they were using these options. It really meant something to them. They needed and wanted them, fitted in with their lives. So there's Europe's largest city in a way, sitting there, lying there, waiting to wake up somewhat, but it will only happen, this waking up, if we get some policy change and some change to some key items like fees, like what happens with the bays, which we presume will be largely empty through at least part of next year, relationships with existing other operators in the city. Do other operators not yet in this city or in this country want to come in? What is the policy landscape that TfL, GLA, London councils, boroughs want to drive forwards on? There's some really exciting opportunities across all those, as well as this being a grim time, obviously.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just linked to the question of the viability of car clubs, you've gone into quite a lot of detail about the factors in why Zipcar has made this announcement. But what about the business model itself? Do you still believe in this model, that there is still a need for this type of approach and this model can still exist?
So I'll take the two questions separately, if you like. So does this model still work query? Yes, I think it can. We're only a few weeks after the publication of the European car sharing report by Inverse, which goes across 42 countries, of course, Europe dominated. And that shows there are healthy markets out there in lots of comparable countries and comparable cities to London. But it is a thin margin business model. It always has been, and it just is. So much global evidence on that. And this is where the approach that London has not explicitly set out to take, but has ended up with, of loading on costs, on costs, on costs, on costs, that can just destroy that margin, and that's what we've seen in effect. Is that business model, in other words, a commercial operator operating at commercial risk while also paying fees to operate? Is that the only way of doing this? No, it isn't. Does that work? It all depends. It can work. I think there's a wider question here, which has been asked a lot on the back of the Zipcar proposed withdrawal, of are there other models that could work? And it's a perfectly legitimate question. So I don't think this tells us overall that commercial model cannot work in London. I think it tells us that it isn't working in this version of London, but other versions of London are definitely available if there's the willpower there to create them. And I think it does also, though, show us the weakness of doing London bit by bit by bit, borough by borough, because you will never have there any cross-subsidy effect, which could be had. And so Outer London is the sufferer of that. And so its provision levels on this existing model are much lower. That's because it is a commercial viability test with extra costs added on. So that will only ever take you so far. So I think it depends on much appetite there is from City Hall, from London councils, boroughs, and all of us on this, hopefully this sort of team of trying to do better here, to think more broadly. But there's certainly some other options to be pursued, thoughts to be had about what kind of support do services like this need in this city.
And we've had responses from other car club operators. Co-Wheels said they've yet to expand its service to London, a direct consequence of these of these prohibitive costs, but we will review that in light of Zipcar withdrawing from London. So it looks like there could be other opportunities. I mean, is there a capacity between operators and other car-sharing platforms to pick up the gap left by Zipcar ceasing operations in London?
In the short term, no, I don't think so, simply because of the scale of Zipcar's fleet. It is around 90%, as I've said, and so on the assumption that all that is going, I don't think any operator is sitting there with that fleet lying idle, of course, but I don't think anyone's equally able to invest in that in the timeframes that we've got, and then transact that through the incredibly complicated landscape that London presents with the 34 bits of local government, different contractual arrangements for round trip and one way, if other operators wanted to do one way, if boroughs wanted to have it, different arrangements with businesses, pool fleets for boroughs themselves, all the arrangements around embedded Zipcars in housing developments. The list goes on. So it's not as if there's one door marked London that other operators can knock on and try to walk through. It's a lot more complicated than that. However, there is definitely market interest. I've, of course, been talking to any operators who want to, interested in talking with me. I've had a number of conversations these last couple of weeks. That's a real positive. It interrelates a lot with where London goes on this now. So how the market responds depends what it's responding to. And if there's something more attractive in front of it, then there's much greater chance of extra shared car fleet coming in. Will that manage to fill the gap on D-Day, presuming that happens early January? I can't see that happening. So I think the question, though, is how much of that gap can be filled and how quickly. And I think there's also an issue about the bays and what to do about those in the meantime.
And just lastly, I mean, in your statement, you said every car club vehicle replaces 31 private cars in London. I mean, that is quite worrying in some ways, the impact that this is going to have. Is that something that you are concerned about, just in terms of the environmental consequence? Because, you've said you were shocked, but not surprised. I mean, that is part of it, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's high up on the list of concerns boroughs have shared with us in all the borough meetings we've done so far on this. I'm not surprised by that. And it's environmental in a couple of different ways, I think. Is the emissions side of it, which is really important. London's own goals to be net zero carbon city by 2030 and so on. There's also the spatial aspect, and particularly the denser inner London boroughs, where car ownership rates may be down in the 20%, for example. There just really isn't the space to replace each Zipcar with 31 private cars. And that's just thinking about parking. There's obviously an issue when they move around.
That one Zipcar replaces that. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get round now, because it is a bit difficult to get real concrete data on the impact that this will have. How many cars will we see now added to London because of this? I mean, is that really the case, 31 cars per Zipcar?
It's our calculation based on our national level multi-thousand respondent surveys that we run each year with a fresh set of respondents each year, and we've run for almost 20 years now. And it comes from looking at answers to two questions. One is, have you sold a car as a result of using Car Club? And the other is, have you not gone on to acquire a car, purchase or lease, thanks to using Car Club? So it's a metric we've calculated in that way for many, many years, and it's gently ticked up over time. So if we go back a few years, it used to be in the mid-20s and then the earlier 20s and so on. As utilisation has increased, because London's shared car fleet has not actually increased in size at all for quite a number of years now, but the number of members using it has gently increased, although not by as much as we would like to have seen in a growing city. So that's where it comes from. There's no pure data source available here, so we will never know to 100% accuracy what Zipcar members go on to do, because no one has a means of tracking that with absolute accuracy. But I'm very comfortable with it as a calculation. And it also fits with, again, the global evidence. Very much lots of equivalent organisations to us find something very similar to this, different countries around the world.
Okay, I mean, my colleague's going to talk to you about the letter that you've written, but it does sound like you're almost saying that everything that's happened, there's been no reaction from TfL. You feel like is there a feeling of if you just people that TfL just don't care and that this has happened because of that?
I'm afraid to say I think that's about right.
Okay.
I think, to be fair, the tone has changed significantly since this has happened. So if I'm answering the question about how has TfL been in the last couple of weeks, then tonally it's quite different. That in and of itself isn't going to change much, although the public statements they've been making have been much more favourable. That helps a little, for sure. But really, of course, it's their actions that will then land or not land here. But I think if we're going before the last couple of weeks, it has been a position of neglect at best, really. The Mayor's transport strategy is very narrow and confused on Car Club. There has been no plan around Car Club that's had any efficacy for a good number of years now. And you've really got to wind the clock back a long way to find a time where Transport for London was positive and impactfully positive about car clubs, which it used to be. If you look at what was put out in promotional terms and policy around congestion charge introduction, or leaflets that were handed out at rail stations going back to 2007, 2008, etc., or the joint research that they used to fund and do with us. So lots of things it used to do that were more positive, but that it has abandoned over time. And not had a focus on it, but while lumping extra cost onto it.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Richard. Just picking up on some of what Assembly Member Bakari was just talking about, the sort of, you know, the numbers of people who are impacted by Zipcar closing, saying that they're closing down. I've had numerous emails from people living in car-free developments saying they bought their flat in 2012. There was a car club down the road. They didn't have any concerns about buying into a car-free development. And now they're facing a really difficult situation because they're not allowed by the terms of the planning permission for their block of flats to own a car that gets parked on the road. But by removing the ability of belonging to a car club and having access to a car for those occasional journeys when you need one, has left them just completely stuck and really quite cross because that's a really fundamental policy change. And actually, given that the planning policies are based on the availability of car club cars, then you can understand why people might well have something to say to the Mayor about that. But I'm also struck by the number of conversations I've had. Like, I went into a local greengrocer where I live, and they use a car club car sometimes to sort of pick stuff up. And they knew I work here, and they said, so, you know, what's happening? This is just awful. And then other people in the queue said, we don't have a car, and we use a car club maybe once a month. And it's so I think there are parts of inner London, like Islington, where this greengrocer I'm talking about is, where there are very high levels of car club users who have just got completely used to aiming to use a car as little as possible, but having that comfort of knowing that they can use a car for the very occasional trips, maybe once a month, maybe less than once a month, when they want to use a car. But if I understand there's about 550,000 Zipcar members in London, so even if a tenth of those people decided to get another car, we'd be talking about another 55,000 cars on the road, and all the additional parking stress that would provide to the people who already own cars, who would be quite grumpy about those extra cars turning up. So I'm just thinking that, I'm glad to hear you say that TfL have been, sounding like they sort of understand the issue better since Zipcar have made their declaration. But it does seem as if there is a huge relationship between the fact that Inner London has a denser network of car clubs, and there are a lot of people in Inner London who don't own cars. So, many boroughs are down at sort of 30% access to a car or van. The fact that there's fewer car clubs in Outer London and more car use in Outer London, I'm just wondering whether you think TfL have really grasped the kind of policy potential of car club availability, and actually, one of the carrots to get more people to reduce their car use and perhaps go down to not having a car could be, actually investing, could there be a TfL roundel involved with car clubs?
Thank you. Yep, number of points there. Could there be a TfL roundel on it? Yes, potentially. Very interesting idea. It has been looked at before. From what I've been told, TfL came quite close to it, going back a good number of years now, a decade or more. But certainly it needs something that puts some sort of coherence to it, puts some energy into it, and takes some steps that really matter, that really deliver to all the issues I've been running through as to why we are where we are. You touched on a number of points there, just a couple of thoughts on them. Absolutely about people going to buy cars, and the numbers quickly spiral out to be quite terrifying. This doesn't surprise us because we've worked with this research and this dynamics for years and years. That we've been in that queue in the greengrocer, so to speak. I think TfL are effectively just joining the queue in the greengrocers and realising it exists. I think there's another aspect around it as well, which is around equity and social access to a car, because although there's a huge danger of people going off to buy a car or lease one of their own, of course, for lots of Londoners, that's not a financial option, but who are Zipcar users or users of any other car club service here. So this is even worse in a way for them, because then there's an option just gone completely. The business side of things, you mentioned vans there, I think is really important, and it's a good chance to make this point. The demand for car club is really best understood as being comprised of sort of base level demand that you can get from businesses, institutions, the pool fleet world, all of these steady custom, non-individual consumer sources of demand are really, really important to car club. Always have been, always will be. That side of things is more difficult than it needs to be. I think it's something where some fresh thinking is needed. At the individual consumer side is obviously hugely important as well, and done right, the two can support each other often very nicely. But that's not anything that's been there in the policy. All that you ran through there is a perfect illustration of the pitfalls of having very limited policy. So the housing development's parking point comes about quite largely through policy. It's helped that enormously, actually. It is the one bit where the Mayor's Transport Strategy talks about car club, London Plan, etc. I've said it's narrow and confused, but there is that bit. But the trouble, obviously, is if you have only that one bit of policy, and that's all you've got, we now see the results. So people have been led down the path, so to speak, there. It's a great path to go down, but none of the rest of the, if you like, garden has been thought of. And so suddenly those options are going. We've heard this from boroughs a lot about housing developments. They're very worried about it. They're scrambling around. Other operators are getting phone calls a lot about this from housing developers, etc. In a way, that's good, because arrangements are being talked about that should see some gaps being filled. And of the more urgent gaps, these problems probably are at the more urgent end of it. Again, though, if London can bring itself together more around this and have an understanding of the scale of the problem, be thinking collectively about what the solutions might be, it's going to do a lot better than simply a set of effectively ad hoc conversations, which is where we are at the moment.
Okay. Now, you recently coordinated an open letter, which I signed, declared at the beginning of the meeting, calling for the Mayor of London and the London boroughs to work together with urgency to create more favourable conditions for car clubs to operate and expand. So can you set out what policy measures you think need to happen really urgently, so like now, to support car clubs to operate in London?
Yes, so I think let's start with the boroughs, because they are the ones who are the highway authorities, of course. They are also extremely exposed to this in multiple different directions, a lot of which we've listed already here. So I think it's really important that they and all the ones we've talked to, and we've talked to well over 20 now, are doing this, but they have a look at what they've got in place at the moment, understand the scale of the problem, have a think about what they can do on fees and what they could do to reduce those fees, have a think about what they can do about process and contractual arrangements for any incoming or expanding operators to open doors more than they have historically been. But having said all of that, come back to the coherence point, this isn't just on boroughs, or it shouldn't be. So I think there's a really important convening role here for London councils if they want to be part of that, and certainly TfL and GLA to help pull these things together, because the downsides of doing this borough by borough, it's partly become very obvious, I think, with the Zipcar proposed withdrawal. It's laborious for everybody involved, and you could very easily, in fact, it's very hard to avoid ending up with, if you like, bad variation. These different approaches to things set at different levels for various particular reasons, but when you look at it as an overall piece, as operators must, and as Londoners do, and visitors do, it doesn't work anything like as well as it could. So there's a big immediate bit about borough arrangements, and then just to add to that list, bays. There are roughly 2,500 vehicles in the Zipcar fleet. A significant proportion of those are back to bay. So the question is already burning very brightly at boroughs about what to do with these bays. The assumption some will be free once Zipcar leaves. If it does, then I think there's a really important conversation to be getting into right now. And we started this ourselves yesterday with a big meeting with boroughs and TfL and London councils about all of this, but including about the bays. And I think on the one hand, it's impossible to take the line that those bays must be preserved forever, even if we're not going to manage to get shared cars into some of them. But on the other hand, it's disastrous to let them go permanently. They've taken years to build up as a network through all these laborious borough by borough processes with too much cost and so on. So that is, it would be a terrible blow if that happened. So there's a balance to be struck there. That's a classic, I think, of conversations where, yes, it's about the boroughs. They are their highways. But on the other hand, just leaving each borough to struggle with this on its own is so inefficient and unhelpful that, you know, the problems, I think, are really obvious. I think there's then some stuff that's specifically at TfL's GLA City Hall's doors about taking this impactful policy approach, having a policy that relates to Car Club in London that says, we like this, we like car sharing more broadly. I would like to see the recognition of lift sharing more broadly than that. In other words, we see that there is a real need and opportunity for use of cars on an occasional basis that takes away from private car ownership, supports public transport and active travel very much, it shares our goals. In effect, if you look at Policy 23 in the Mayor's Transport Strategy, it's a terrific description of car sharing, actually. It's actually a policy that says, here are the sorts of things that we like, just at a generic level. But it's a perfect jumping off point, in our view, for TfL here, to look at that. This ticks so many of those boxes, and to take a serious approach to it. Revision of the Mayor's Transport Strategy is, I've been told, off the table, so we'll have to live with that. But, you know, never mind. there's lots that they could be getting on with here. And I think essentially London has to be a more organised, more welcoming, lower cost operating environment, and then we will start to see something coming along which is more like what it should be, hopefully, given it's Europe's largest city with some of its most economically productive areas and so on.
Do you think there's a tension in the purpose of a car club? Because the purpose of a car club, or one of the policy purposes, is to reduce the number of car trips that get made, and but to give residents the confidence to give up on owning a car and having that absolute convenience of a vehicle that usually sits parked 98% of the time, but you own it and therefore you can just use it when you want to, and you've got that flexibility. So people decide they use their car so little, they decide, yes, I'm going to go with the car club thing. But if the car club is being successful, those people who move from owning a car to using a car club car occasionally will probably, and certainly this has happened with us, and I think it's probably happened with a lot of other car club users that I talk to, you end up using a car less and less. And so if a successful car club has people using car clubs less and less, that means there's a kind of, presumably, there's a sort of commercial tension in there, and TfL needs to kind of work out the kind of policy value to TfL of having a large group of people who are using cars less and less, against, setting against possibly lowering the costs of operation for the operators.
Yeah, really interesting. So I think there is a tension point in there. I think they'll have to speak for themselves, but I think TfL, for many years, my suspicion has been they've had a bit of a different tension point in mind, which is that car clubs actually tempt people into driving and thereby into car ownership, in fact. All our evidence over many years and right around the world overwhelmingly points in the other direction, as your question did. So there is this tension point of sort of eating itself a little bit with its own success. I have 2 points I'd say in response to that. One is that we are so far from optimised in London so far. So there are a lot of London where we're in no way in danger of getting into that dynamic. We're nowhere near it. And with Zipcar going, as we're presuming they are, that gets much worse. The gap that we were just talking about in provision. The other bit is, absolutely, then this takes us to the policy question of, well, if we do like these services, which TfL has now started saying, what should we do about that? What support should we give? So I've been talking about protecting things at the bays, reducing things, the fees. I haven't talked about direct financial support to car sharing services, but clearly other cities and areas do give that. Or they give very direct help in other ways by restricting parking for private cars or increasing cost of parking for private cars, or both, or facilitating parking arrangements that are very convenient for car sharing, so it really links into fixed line public transport networks, etc. All approaches that London lacks in this space. It takes us in a way to the Outer London question that you touched on with the previous question. And in many ways, that is the great conundrum, because we're stuck at 64% sustainable mode share, been there for a decade as a city overall. The front line of that, the battleground, is Outer London much more than it's Inner London. So we have now a big job on our hands of trying to recover the position in Inner London. But that would still leave us with the Outer London question by and large. And there, the question about what kind of support is needed is a really pressing one, because even before Zipcar's departure, provision there was patchy and in quite large parts just not there. So this existing way of doing things wasn't succeeding in getting sufficient provision out there on the ground. But absolutely, that's where the highest dominance of private car is. And in many ways, the paradox is that's where a great opportunity lies.
So just finally, we've been sort of talking about the Mayor's transport strategy and delivery of the targets in the Mayor's transport strategy. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about the impact of if Zipcar go on the delivery of the Mayor's transport strategy targets?
I think the only other point I'll just add is that the impact is really profound, but we don't yet understand it fully. We haven't experienced it yet. So the sorts of data points I've been talking about, conversations you've been reporting and others have been having and so on, they're just the start. And my suspicion is that if we don't all come together and put shoulders to the wheel on this, and even if we do, through 2026, we will see the true horror revealing itself of just how much this mattered. And the impacts of that go to private cars, as we've been talking about, but they also go to public transport and active travel use. So I feel another piece of jigsaw, which I hope TfL, London councils will be interested in, is what's the impact of this on public transport use and on active travel use, which are things, of course, that they back, but in so many different ways. That has never really been part of the conversation in London, part of the understanding. But I think it's one of many indirect impacts that we'll see running through 2026. The question will just be how big that is. In other words, how many people are turned off away from public transport active travel journeys, but having been turned on to more private car journeys as a result of Zipcar going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assemblymember Russell. Just alerting everyone, we're, as always, running quite substantially behind. Assemblymember Mwema.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you, Richard. I just wanted to start by reading some correspondence to you. I won't read all of it, just the substantive bits, from a constituent of mine who, TfL will be happy to know that they are very supportive of ULEZ, low traffic neighbourhoods, air quality measures and so on. But I guess the point that you've raised in your introduction, this person says, for context, I'm a doctor with no financial connection to Zipcar and have been a member since its earliest days, having used Streetcar before Zipcar acquired it around 2010. In that time, Zipcar has given me a viable, low-use, low-impact alternative to private car ownership. If the service were to close, which we know it is, I would reluctantly need to buy a car, as other forms of rental do not meet the needs of short, practical, local journeys. Now that, I imagine, I hope you'd agree with me, is the experience of thousands of people, particularly in London, who I was interested to hear that you said that TfL think car clubs push people into car ownership. It seems like quite the opposite is true, based on our virtual post bags. But I just wonder, in your work, you're really encouraging people to share their stories, and that's one story that I just wanted to share with you here. But it would be really good to hear some of the impacts on vulnerable groups, small businesses, and community organisations that so far have relied on Zipcar, and in the case of this person, likewise will be forced into car ownership, which they probably can't really afford at this moment in time.
Yes, thank you. That fits very much with the experience we hear reported on our StoryShare page, and it also fits in general with the reasons people give for using Car Club in our national annual surveys as well. So no great surprises in the abstract, but I think it's very impactful when you come down to the individual life. And one thing that story says to me, which is so many of them have said, is when you look at the use cases people are laying out there, I defy anybody, whoever it may be, Transport for London, whoever, to come up with a compelling alternative to that journey need, which someone was using Zipcar for. and you can see it again and again and again. It's occasional use need. It's often quite unpredictable. It's sometimes around quasi-emergency medical needs is a very common thread. It's often when public transport is not operating, as in nighttime journeys or edge of nighttime journeys, or it's commonly to areas where public transport scarcely or doesn't exist. You can see those sorts of threads again and again and again in these stories. And so I think it's impossible really to come up with compelling alternatives that aren't the private car as to how someone can sensibly make those journeys. And after all, we don't live in a city where anybody is forced by outright policy design to make journeys in certain ways. Of course, they're shaped by policy choices, how they make journeys, but they're not outright forced. It isn't a dictatorship, of course. So, take this option away from people, and those that can financially afford it will, I'm confident, be looking heavily to private car, which has all sorts of damaging consequences that we were just going through. I'll send to the committee our story share page, and you'll be able to see there all the stories that we've been collecting. I'd also direct the committee of the clerks to look at, there's a couple of Reddit threads running on this. One's at well over 700 posts. It is stuffed full of stories just like the one you were making there. A lot of people have been members for a long time. That's also a common thread. And so they are, they're left bereft of another option almost certainly, although again points to the urgency of the efforts that we want to make with all stakeholders to try to fill the gap as much as possible, to try to attract other operators in or existing operators to grow, to try and minimise that gap, and perhaps that doctor can switch to another option in January or as soon as possible afterwards.
Okay, thank you. And just really quickly from me again, so you said in response to a question from Assembly Member Bakari that you felt that TfL had been a little bit passive until Zipcar's closure became a reality. So I guess I want to put to you, why is it that you think that TfL didn't really seem that bothered until that point, until crunch point? We've got a situation where buses are private companies, but they provide a public service. How do we shift this into that kind of a space in the long term? And the huge chasm is the complete scarcity of car clubs in London. And I mean, it was before my time, before I joined the committee, but the recommendations from this committee around car clubs were, at best, they're just not going to do it. So maybe some responses to those points.
Yeah, I wish I had a clear answer for you about why, in terms of TfL's approach over the last few years. I've been asking myself that question the whole time. I just don't have an answer. I don't know if they do. I'd be very interested to know if there is one. I guess all I can say additionally to that is, we are a national charity, and so we deal with authorities right across the UK all the time. It's a big part of what we're here for. And I have seen TfL stuck, in effect, in this unique place of lack of interest, lack of engagement, even suspicion. And I've not experienced another authority across the country that is like that. There's not another that I can put in that category. There are authorities that are keener or less keen, that do more impactful or less impactful things, etc. But there's no one else on this sort of level. And if you pick up the phones, as I literally do, to other TFs, other metro transport authorities across the country, they're all better disposed to this. Whether they're making the best job they can of what they can do around it is then another question. But I felt for a long time that TfL has the sort of attitudinal question with them, and that is the sort of overlay of then why we don't get into helpful activity. I do want to reiterate, though, the last couple of weeks have sounded and felt different. So I think it's important to recognise that and try to work with that. I really hope that continues. Some of the public statements that have been made by them in this last couple of weeks just weren't being made before. So I'm taking that as some potential sign of progress.
Thanks. Well, let's end on that, I think, on possibly a note of hope. But thank you very much, Richard, for again joining us at very short notice to give your expertise on this subject. The committee, we're just going to take a very, very short break just to get our other guests in, just a minute or two, and I'll see you back here in a minute now. Welcome back to today's Transport Committee meeting and our discussion on car clubs in London. And I'd now like to welcome our guests for our second panel, Seb Dance, Deputy Mayor for Transport, and Christina Calderato, Director of Transport Strategy and Policy at Transport for London. Seb, I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions to you and then we'll pass over to the rest of the members of the panel. So I want to take you back to our report earlier this year, TfL stalling car clubs, and our warning that the car club industry in London may be in decline and action was needed from the Mayor at TfL. Now, from our point of view, no clear action was taken. And, you know, I think it's fair to say that we're sort of sitting here and thinking, well, maybe if our report had been heeded a bit, we may not have been in this situation. But can you tell us what engagement the Mayor's Office and Transport for London, so Christina may want to come in, have with Zipcar prior to its decision to cease London operations and also since the announcement?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you for organising this very important meeting at short notice. I know that there will be many people out there who are extremely anxious, customers obviously, but also the staff at Zipcar. And I do call on the parent company to reconsider a decision to withdraw from London. It clearly would be in the members' interests, it would be in Londoners' interests were they to reconsider that decision. The Mayor, TfL and I recognise that car clubs can provide convenient access to vehicles, including electric vehicles, of course, for key journeys that can't be made always by public transport, and that, of course, does support less congested streets and cleaner air. We also know that car clubs generally serve as a supplement to daily travel behaviour. They tend to be part of a range of modes used by Londoners and are used relatively infrequently compared to other modes to meet, however, specific needs and specific circumstances. For example, in 2024, a TfL survey found that 5% of Londoners had used a car club in the past month. TfL, the Mayor and I are engaging with stakeholders, including boroughs, who manage the provision of car clubs in their local areas to help ensure that car clubs can remain an option for Londoners. In terms of the work that we've done to support car clubs since the Mayor's transport strategy was first released in 2018, it's important to recognise the formal recommendation in the MTS, Proposal 19, that explicitly mentions the role that car clubs can play as a supplement to public transport. It's also important to recognise the financial support that has come from TfL to boroughs through the local implementation plans, LIP funding, which can be used and has been used by boroughs to install bays specifically for car clubs. The best practice guides that TfL have given as a result of the focus that is in the MTS on car clubs for boroughs when it comes to procurement and, of course, the development of resources for boroughs such as the curbside management toolkit that are designed to assist boroughs in providing more provision for car clubs. It's also important to recognise that the policy changes that we've made recently, for example, to the congestion charge explicitly reference car clubs where a 90% exemption was requested from Zipcar in their submission to the changes to the clean vehicle discount. We provided a 100% exemption for vehicles resident within the congestion charge zone. The electric vehicle infrastructure strategy also explicitly mentions the need for additional provision for car clubs, which should be factored in when planning. And of course, we have ongoing engagement with Como UK and the boroughs themselves, supported through the 6 channels that we routinely engage with on data sharing, on public comms, on scrappage schemes, and the committee will remember the ULEZ scrappage scheme where car clubs were explicitly included, mobility credits, the need to include car clubs in electrification strategies, and all of this reported back through quarterly updates. We've been working with Zipcar for some time now. I believe the last meeting with TfL officers, and I'm sure Christina will say more, was in April, and TfL and Zipcar have met more than 10 times since 2022. This autumn, TfL has been engaging with stakeholders to create new commitments for car clubs to support the goals in the MTS, including discussing potential priority areas with Como UK and initial conversations with boroughs to understand the challenges they face. I have also met with other car hire companies to discuss the challenges and barriers that they face in operations in London. I have to say that many of them we can do not a lot about, but some of the barriers they face we can, and that's why I'll be working with them going forward to ensure that we can help on things like, for example, vehicle registration and assisting through fleet registration for autopay, for example, where I know administrative costs are currently very high for some providers. TfL and GLA officers and Como UK met with borough officers from 18 boroughs to discuss the challenges that they are facing yesterday and the importance of maintaining car club bays for options to help people move away from car ownership was, of course, one of the key areas that was identified in that meeting. I do recognise the role that car clubs can play in reducing car ownership. I was one of the members on the 1st of December to receive that email that I didn't want to receive. It was on my birthday, in fact. And my role as Deputy Mayor is to ensure that there is a collaborative approach between the stakeholders, including, of course, the boroughs and the operators, to make sure that we can play a positive role in developing the options that are available to Londoners.
Oh, sorry, I'm turning my mic on. Thanks very much for that. Just a couple of follow-ups on that. You mentioned local implementation plan funding. We had evidence in our meeting that LIP funding didn't directly permit car club bays. So we're getting different messages there. It might be something that you want to clarify either now or outside the meeting. But just to say, we directly had opposing evidence that indicated that car club was being deprioritised versus, other measures to increase modal shift. Is that, Annette, something you can comment on there?
Yeah, so there is LIPS funding available for car clubs. So it's in the similar vein to the MTS. It's about saying where you're doing like a healthy street scheme or something that's going to help reduce private parking, that part of your LIPS funding can be about having car club provision within that. So there is support for that.
So you're rejecting the idea that boroughs are not able to bid for car club base as part of that? Because
yeah, we can provide the guidance where we say, as part of healthy street schemes, if you want to put in car club provision where you're taking away private parking provision, then you can include that within your LIP scheme.
That's very, because obviously this was evidence directly from boroughs that felt that they weren't being supported to expand that provision. So I think clearly there's a problem there, because this wasn't just sort of a rumour, this was direct evidence that we got. Just to follow up, back to Seb, you say you'd like Zipcar to reconsider their decision. I suspect they've considered the decision quite substantially, although we haven't had any contact with them and unable to give evidence directly to us today for very understandable reasons, considering what they're engaged in doing at the moment. And what are you offering to Zipcar to reconsider their decision?
So I'm assuming it's not Zipcar making the decision, it's the parent company. So I'm meeting Zipcar tomorrow, in fact, and I obviously I don't want to speculate on the reasons for the decision that they've taken thus far. I know they have a consultation with their staff, who will obviously be going through a very difficult time at the moment. So I will be meeting with Zipcar, and I will be asking them directly what is it that they would like us to do in the intervening period. But in the meantime, I think it's only right and proper that we ask the parent company to reconsider a decision that will clearly have an impact not just on the users of the service, but the direct employers of Zipcar as well.
Okay, so what are you able to, if going into this meeting with Zipcar, what would you be empowered to consider changing if that decision could be changed at this stage?
Well, with respect, I need to listen to their point of view.
I know, but sure. I mean, this isn't a new policy area. We have, we've taken evidence, there's lots of discussions, there's lots of policy papers. So I think we know, even if we know what specifically we have some idea, a fairly substantial idea of the areas that have become a problem for them. It's many operators have told me and other Assembly members many times what the challenges are. So are there any areas that you're going to be empowered to go in and discuss and adapt if that meant that Zipcar could continue to operate in London?
Well, on the last point of the question, obviously we don't know the reasons behind the decision. Now, there's been a lot of speculation and so on. So that's part of the reason why I need to have the meeting tomorrow with Zipcar, so that I can fully understand certainly the reasons that they've been given, even if that's not necessarily the full consideration that the parent company has. That's for the meeting, if you see what I mean. In terms of the previous discussions that I've had with other car rental companies on the models that they have, on the services that they offer, as I say, there's a number of different barriers that car hire companies face. Cost is obviously a big issue for them in terms of staffing and the models that they have. Point-to-point returns cost more than having a single point of return and delivery. So different companies are going to have different models with varying degrees of profitability. Where we can help and where some of the obstacles that have been raised with me already lie are in some of the administrative areas that people are telling me are difficult for them in terms of processing things that they need to pay. So, for example, when it comes to registering a fleet, not every operator is perhaps au fait with the fleet registration process that we have in place. Now, there might be several reasons for that, but it's incumbent on me to look at what we can do to then overcome the barriers that they're facing to reduce their administrative costs. Very happy to do that. That's one of the reasons that has been given to me by a different car hire company. Obviously, I need to understand what's going on at Zipcar and at Avis more generally.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, I think that level of detailed engagement about the barriers is welcome, but obviously we're in a very sticky state with 90% of the cars that are leaving in January anyway. Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. I was really intrigued by the fact that neither the Mayor nor TfL released any statements following Zipcar's announcement, which is why I made the comment about whether TfL even cared. I mean, my concern is perhaps that I asked about data. I asked about, the fact that there is this suggestion that there could be a massive increase of cars and congestion because of this decision by by Zipcar. But is this kind of lack of prioritisation from TfL because of a position of thinking that this model isn't working, and were you thinking this was doomed in the first place?
So I think, I mean, it was good to hear Richard talking earlier about the public statements that we have been making and the sort of engagement we've been having since Zipcar. So I think we have been kind of vocal in that space. Because this is something that we really want to support, and we want to be clear that car clubs, car sharing, do have a role to play in helping reduce car ownership and help us achieve the goals of the MTS. So that is our clear position. It's the position in the transport strategy. We've been really clear with boroughs and Como and London councils in the past few weeks that we want to be an active part of helping to try and find the solutions to this, because I think they do play a really important role in the city. So that's kind of our position. That's the position that we've had throughout, engaging with with Como's forums, with the boroughs in like EV charge point operators forums, getting Como and the car club operators into that. So we have had that kind of ongoing engagement. Obviously, in the past couple of weeks, that's really kind of stepped up a gear, as you can imagine, but that's because we want to help be part of the solution.
Do you have the data and evidence also to back up the claims that we've been hearing about the increase of cars and congestion because of Zipcar's announcement?
So I think, as you just heard Richard say, the kind of numbers about vehicles being replaced are based on kind of survey data over a much greater area. And there are different studies which give different numbers for that kind of vehicle replacement. I think it's very hard for us to know what that data is about the kind of vehicle ownership and vehicle use trends. I think what we see from our data is that they are a kind of relatively small part of people's everyday travel. They, perform part of that larger transport mix, which is exactly them working well. That's what you want to do. On those occasions where people need to use a car, that's what they'll use. But it tends to be quite a small part of that kind of overall mix. And when you look at those Como survey results as well, you can see, so you've got like 46% of people that say if that car club vehicle wasn't available, they would make that trip by another means of car trip, if you like. But then you've got nearly a third of people saying that if the car club vehicle wasn't available, they would use public transport, walking or cycling. So I think it's going to be a very different picture depending on where in London you are, what your circumstances are. But I think that what we don't want to do is just kind of try it out. What we'd really like to do is make sure that we can keep the potential for car clubs to have that kind of viable service for Londoners to help them move away from private car ownership.
You're talking about having, a meeting potentially for the Zipcar to change their mind, but we're hearing that from our previous guests that it's very unlikely that that's going to happen, and very unlikely that we'll get any other alternative to replace Zipcar in the short term. So are you going to use this time then to assess and look at the data and look at the impact that this is going to have? Because if we're hearing that there will be an increase of cars, you'll see it right there and then, won't you?
So I think that there is interest from other car club operators that aren't currently in London or in other parts of the UK or in other cities. I think there is interest from some of those. So I think that's what we want to be making sure that we're in those conversations now with Como, with boroughs, to make sure how can we actually kind of have really positive, constructive conversations with them so that we can see that kind of some of those spaces, some of those bays, some of that market being picked up by the operators. So we will be part of that conversation. And then I think it's going to be any data that we can get from car club operators about their members and what they do, we will happily take. We have our own research, as I say, that shows how people use them in the kind of mix of journeys and modes that they use. But exactly what that kind of car replacement effect will be, I think is probably not well understood.
I mean, one of the things that we asked in terms of our recommendations, you responded with that you were going to do maximisation of awareness-raising opportunities through your own channels. Did you actually put that in place? Because I'd like to know what kind of action you did do after our committee's meeting in January this year. Was that part of the approach? What evidence can you give us that you've actually done that?
Yeah, so we've been doing that even probably over a longer period of time through engaging with operators and thinking about how we can build that into our kind of messaging. So we spent a long time working with operators and particularly Zipcar, in the run-up to the London-wide ULEZ expansion, and made those kind of car club messages a really core part of that. So all of those key messages said the ULEZ is here to try and kind of encourage people to shift to walking, cycling, public transport where they can, and where they can't, to consider using a car club vehicle for those journeys. So we made that part of the absolutely core messaging. We've updated all the car club pages on the website. We made them a really big part of the third-party offers, so we really promoted them through that. So actually we worked together really quite closely on that, and we tried to make sure that those kind of web pages and where we're directing people to on the website do make it as easy as possible for people to find that information.
I mean, is that what the Deputy Mayor was referring to, the financial support Borough Local Communication Fund? Was that partly to do with that public awareness approach?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, in terms of work we're doing...
So you worked across all boroughs?
So
or were you only working with the councils that were reliant on it? Because that's the thing that we found from our last investigation. It was a bit of a patchwork approach across boroughs. Some councils are really reliant on it, some weren't. So I'm interested to know how you've been using that approach in terms of the financial support. Is it just boroughs that use it, councils that use it? Or all of them?
So I think for us, really, in terms of financial support, it's really through the LIPS process. That's where the kind of financial support for TfL can come from for boroughs in terms of car clubs. And then through the ULEZ and the scrappage and the third-party offers, we've been able to both work with them. So through the scrappage scheme, you could have an enhanced, and if you didn't use scrappage, you could still have, there were car club offers available, which the industry really worked hard with us to kind of produce those, and that was a really helpful offer, I think, for people.
I mean, what's going to happen now, though? There's going to be councils that were really reliant on this, and with this announcement, they're a bit stranded now. What are you going to do about those particular councils? How are you going to support them?
So I think what we can do is that kind of convening, being part of that conversation. We don't have powers over borough parking bays, the fees, the charges, some of those really big obstacles that people have talked about. We have no regulatory function. We aren't the highway authorities. I think the role and the influence that we can bring to bear is bringing those kind of, being part of that conversation, bringing boroughs together, sharing best practice, helping to put that policy support in place so that they know exactly that we support the car clubs in terms of helping to replace private car ownership. So all of that kind of messaging we can be clear on, but also supporting them with that sharing of best practice. That can be the role that we play as a kind of London-wide voice, but it's for individual boroughs to make those decisions about their road space and their bays.
At the moment, isn't it? It's not just passengers generally across, it's the councils and as themselves, you know. Anyway, I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thanks. Assemblymember Wemmer, did you want to ask?
I did. I wanted to just follow up on something. Good afternoon, Christina, sorry. You said in response to Assemblymember Bakari that 46% of people was if there wasn't an option of a car club, of Zipcar, when it closes, would use alternative car provision. So that is basically a private car.
Or a taxi or a PHV or a different hire car, not necessarily a private car.
And if people, and do you have another percentage for if people didn't have access to that mode of transport, that they would walk or cycle? I feel like that really misses what people are using car club vehicles for. Your response suggests, with respect, a bit of passivity around the fact that people aren't just using car club vehicles for commuting. In fact, that's not what they're for. It's every now and then when you need to, I don't know, go to the rubbish dump, you need to collect something big. If you're a community group, you need to bring large, I don't know, equipment back and forth. I had a builder at my house today, this morning, who doesn't have a vehicle. He brought his tools over to my house in a vehicle and he took it back this afternoon, texted in the first half to say, I've left now. That's kind of ideally, but it's because you can't bring your tools into on the tube at rush hour. So it's filling a gap where the proposal or the passive outcome from what you're saying is that people will be forced to buy vehicles and so I don't think it actually really fundamentally addresses that particular point. And then I don't know whether or not Assemblymember Baker may want to come in. I wasn't on the committee last year, as I say. But if you're suggesting that what TfL has done is to promote lip funding to boroughs, but boroughs have been to this committee and they've said that that's not happened, then I think it's more than just something has fallen away in translation, and they're saying that you haven't done that and you're saying that you have. So it's just, it kind of begs a question around what has happened in terms of proactive pushing of support for car clubs. Because I would just say really quickly, one of the things that underpins car-free development in the 3 boroughs that I represent, say 5.5 out of 7 parliamentary constituencies I personally would classify as in London. The thing that underpins car-free development and its success is that there has been an understanding and appreciation of car clubs, access to one, vehicles if you need to do like the bigger items, and in exchange for that there is low car ownership. So what this does by TfL just kind of abrogating responsibility a bit, because the Deputy Mayor has said that there have been conversations since April this year with Zipcar around what's happening. It's not clear what's happened between April and now. If the thing that's happened is that Borough has been told you can go and use your lip funding, but they've been here before to say no, they haven't.
Okay, sorry, I can probably provide some helpful clarification. I probably haven't articulated that brilliantly. So I think on the first point, I didn't mean to imply that I meant that these trips were commute trips. Like, I totally take your point and agree that actually where people are using car clubs because they don't need to own a private vehicle, then they will be those different kind of ad hoc one-off trips in many cases, or even if they're like semi-regular, you know, visiting somebody and you need a car for that trip but you don't need them for other trips. But the research point was just, and it's the Como survey, it's not our own research, but it's about your most common trip. So it was just saying that for the most common trip, for 46% of people, that is a trip that needs to be made by car one way or another, whether it's a PHV or a taxi or your own car, it would need to be made by car. But for 31% of trips, if the car club vehicle wasn't there, there would be public transport, cycling, walking alternatives. So I think it's just that there are for those different trips, for different people, there will be different options there. So I think that was just to state the findings of that survey rather than to kind of imply that it was a commuting or other type of trip. In terms of the LIPS funding, I was sort of responding on the particular funding point. So that's definitely not the only thing that we've been doing to kind of promote car clubs, if you like. There is LIPS funding available to boroughs. That's a sort of funding point.
I'm also making the point that Assembly members who are here in that session
so I need to
say that that's not happened.
Yeah, so I need to go away and find out what the confusion is about LIPS. Yeah, it's on there, so we can clarify that, and I can make sure that it's clear with boroughs as well. I can definitely take that action. I think in terms of wider promotion and what we've been doing for car clubs, that's happened across a whole sort of suite of different areas, if you like, because lots of the challenges that apply to car clubs will fall under different elements of, like, for example, Vision Zero. So we'll pick up safety aspects where we're talking in a Vision Zero active plan. There are 2 particular ones that is worth mentioning. The electric vehicle infrastructure strategy, which we've updated. And as part of that, we identified that car club users were a priority user group. So we are saying that's London-wide guidance. It's about the strategy. So it's both for what we're doing, but it's also for other private charge point operators to say, you need to consider car clubs and car club users as a priority user group above other drivers, because we need to make sure that these are attractive and viable, and we're making sure that we are addressing their needs. So that's one of the places where we've identified that car clubs should be really treated as a priority. The other is we've been looking at our kind of curbside toolkits and guidance for boroughs. So again, being really clear about where you've got limited road space, what should that kind of hierarchy of needs be, what should different things be in different places. So we're really trying to provide that kind of policy narrative, that policy voice to say, it happens in different places because there isn't a kind of car club policy, because we're not that car club regulator. You see it sprinkled across different kind of topics, themes, action plans, areas. But they are a couple of concrete examples of where we have said car club users need to be seen as priority users.
Sorry, Assembly members, I'm going to abuse my position as chair. I feel like I've slipped into a parallel universe, or rather I feel like I've slipped back about 11 months to the start of this investigation, where we tried to work out why TfL thought differently to everyone else and every other bit of evidence in terms of the support that car clubs have in terms of reducing car ownership and therefore car trips overall. And yet, and we wrote a whole report about it, and said there's a real danger. And then Zipcar have pulled out. And here we are saying, hold on a minute, we think you were wrong. And yet, Christina, you're picking out bits of research to throw back at us, basically implying that, no, we're not quite sure that car clubs really do reduce car clubs. Look, there's this bit about bus. Honestly, I feel like this is bizarre. And we're hearing, it was good to hear from Richard Dilks from Como that TfL and the Mayor are, there's a different vibe, basically. I haven't seen it. I'm glad the operators are seeing it. I haven't seen it in the statements, and I'm not hearing it here again today. I'm quite baffled. And all those little, examples of work that you've done, I'll just pick out one of them because it's one that's really obvious. Support for the expansion of ULEZ, support if people scrap their cars to go over to have discounted membership. There isn't car club provision in the vast majority of outer London. It's completely pointless to a load of people who scrap it, would have wanted to scrap their car. So it all sounds very nice in these tiny little bits. You said, oh, yeah, we've got a bit in this policy. But fundamentally, TfL and the Mayor have not put any welly behind saying this is a priority and therefore use the measures you have because this is a good thing in London. And that's why we are here today. And I'm not hearing, I've heard some things from Seb about, making a bit more of an effort to reach out to the operators and try, let's see where that goes. But I'm hearing exactly the same things from TfL, and that really worries me.
I think I want to be really clear that we are supportive of trying to step in and help the boroughs work together with us to make sure that we have a viable car club provision for Londoners, because car clubs can play a really valuable role in helping people move away from car ownership. I can say that unequivocally, that is our position. What I would like us to do is to try and work with those boroughs to understand how we can start to make those barriers easier, take them away, take away some of the things that make it difficult for people to operate now. You've heard about a kind of patchwork approach. We can't fix that ourselves, but we can try and come together with the boroughs to do that. We're really willing to do it. Where we do have our own role in kind of setting policies and strategies, we're trying to identify that car clubs should be treated as priority users because of those good policy reasons. So if that's not clear, then I'm sorry, but that is our position. So if I can be clearer about that, then...
There are words and there are actions, and when we asked for evidence back at the beginning of the year for our investigation, and we asked London councils, at that time they came back to us and said they were no longer doing any work, and certainly it was my strong impression was that because there was no longer work at TfL going on to any degree, and therefore they'd stopped doing it as well. I mean, it really feels like TfL are trying to dodge any responsibility here and say, oh, yeah, no, we'll get people together. But TfL set the direction in a lot of things on transport in London. What are the priorities? What are the most important modes? How are we going to do it? Do it through funding. But, it's not been there, and I don't hear today any change in that. And that's really, really disappointing considering where we are.
OK, I mean, I've met with Zipcar, I've met with the car club operators myself throughout the past few years. That's been ongoing. So it's definitely not that we haven't been doing anything. My team have been doing that as well. So that has been ongoing throughout. We are here today. We have, been working with Richard particularly closely, as again, he's referenced in the past couple of weeks. It's not that we haven't been doing anything before then, but of course, in the last couple of weeks, there has been an increased urgency because we are in this position that we don't want to be in. And I want to be clear that we stand ready to support boroughs and everybody else to do that. We can set a policy narrative. I totally agree, and that's what I'm saying. Where we have those guidance documents, we are trying to set that out clearly. Car club users should be seen as priorities over other road users, other private drivers. That makes sense. We've got essential traffic, and then we've got vehicles which are helping people move away from car ownership. Great. We should be prioritising those and professional drivers, taxi drivers, PHV drivers, car clubs. we've mentioned those as those priority areas in those policies. So we are trying to send those signals, but I don't have regulatory powers. We don't have powers over parking. We don't have powers over the charges and fees.
I understand.
But we can be part of that conversation to try and make it easier, more consistent, better for operators.
Okay. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. So you say you've got no regulatory powers, and presumably you also don't have any access to Zipcar's data. So I'm wondering, are you, in your conversations with Zipcar, are you considering the value of their data to you, TfL, in transport planning terms, and whether there might be some kind of support that could be given to make a car club more viable for the operator in return for that very valuable data that they hold? I mean, I, like someone who was mentioned by Richard Dilks, joined Streetcar back when it first started, and that's when we got rid of one car and we hung on to one car, but we joined the car club in case we ever needed two cars. We had small children at the time. And then back in 2014, decided to go to no car at all. And since then, we probably, averaging out over a year, maybe use a car club about 12 times in total. And that definitely, the alternative to those trips is not using a bike or using public transport or even using a taxi. It's, people have told me they use Zipcar every time they move flat, and for many people that's quite a frequent thing. Someone told me they've moved flat 7 times this year. And it's kind of, so if you got that data from Zipcar on how frequently the majority of their users use a Zipcar, that might actually help to underpin how the use of car clubs connects with the MTS. And it sort of feels at the moment, without that data, it's just anecdotal. It's me saying, well, I use Zipcar maybe about once a month, and other people saying similar things. But kind of actually getting hold of that data from Zipcar could be incredibly helpful, and also helpful in relation to the car-free developments. How many people living in car-free developments are using, how frequently do they use Zipcar, and therefore what priority should TfL be putting to actually making sure that people in car-free developments make sure that there is a decent density of car club cars around car-free developments, because for those people, they're really stuck. They don't even have the option, if they're in a position to afford to buy a car, to actually to go out and buy a car to replace their what used to be provided by the car club. But it seems from a policy position that you are going to need to really urgently address the provision of car club bays around car-free developments, because if you don't, you're then going to have a huge load of challenges to the London Plan and to the if there is no longer a car club, then are those car-free development planning conditions still in place? I don't know, but that is presumably something that you're working on. But my question for you, sorry, having just sort of spurted a load of things, is how do you think that Zipcar's departure from London is going to impact progress against the MTS targets? And included in that is the risk of increased parking stress from more people owning cars, congestion, and just a general increase in private car ownership.
Yeah, so There was a lot in all of that.
Yes,
so
sorry, I feel very passionate
really,
about this stuff.
helpful points within it, I think. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned that I should have done beforehand, particularly when we're talking about what we've done this year, is we had a set of 6 commitments that we worked up together with the car club industry in 2022 that we've been working through. We've been updating those this year and engaging with operators and Como on what those kind of refreshed commitments should be. So we've been doing that throughout this year, and the data sharing point is a really important part of that. So obviously it's helpful for us to get data, no one's compelled to share it with us, but the more that we can understand how they're working, that will give us all better information to work with, essentially. I hadn't really thought about the kind of opportunity, if you like, that might lie within the Zipcar situation, but that's definitely something that's worth thinking about. I think in terms of MTS goals, it goes back to what we've been saying, that car clubs play a role that nothing else plays. It's kind of a unique role, isn't it, that providing of a car when people need it, when there isn't an alternative. So I think that is important for helping us achieve the MTS as part of a much wider suite of policies, obviously, that all kind of work together, which is why we'd really like to try, kind of work out how we can try and support other operators potentially coming in to try and fill some of that gap, because we don't want to see people who have not needed to have a vehicle feel the need to try and move towards one. Obviously, lots has changed over the past decade, longer, some of those factors will be affecting Zipcar's, customer base. People are travelling differently. We see that from our own, all of our reporting. People are travelling less, they're taking fewer trips. All of those things will be playing into the fact that what people do now will slightly depend on circumstances, the way their trips have changed, what they used to use Zipcars for, what journeys they're making now. But what we want to make sure is that if you need to make the odd trip by car, that you have a means of doing that. That means you don't need to own your own. So we'll be working across boroughs, with London councils, with operators and Como to try and make sure that we have those provisions in place.
And do you think it's going to be possible to maintain service so that from the 31st of January, when Zipcar say 31st of December, when Zipcar say they're pulling out, that there will be something else in place by the 1st of January, or do you think there's going to be a gap?
Yeah.
And do you think that people are going to have to get used to using multiple different services? Because at the moment, for anyone who lives in an area covered by Zipcar, you just use Zipcar, and if the cars nearest to where you live are all out, you can usually find one if you're prepared to jump on a bus or walk or use your bike and lock it up by the car parking place. You can usually find a Zipcar that you can use. But if there's going to be a sort of patchwork of different operators, then that becomes a less convenient, flexible thing, because you might need to be a member of multiple car clubs to get that flexibility to be able to find a car when you need one.
And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we should be discussing in the round as that group with boroughs and Como. Like, actually, how do we make this as user-friendly and as customer-friendly as possible? Because we know from some of the barriers to people using car clubs, that actual kind of public understanding of how they work is one of the barriers. So actually, I think that's something, again, that we can have a voice in, have a role in, is trying to, once we've kind of had those discussions about what that future looks like, how can we help people understand what the offer is and how they engage with it? I think to the original part of your question, I share Richard's view that it's unlikely that there will be a sort of seamless transition to new arrangements on the 1st of January. Although, of course, we are still waiting to hear what Zipcar's kind of final outcome is, but assuming that they do cease operations, I think there's likely to be a gap. But what we want to do, and I think this is something Richard talked about as well in terms of preserving bays, is support boroughs, and I think this goes to that kind of policy direction that we can provide, into kind of trying to preserve those bays, not giving them over to private parking. How can we kind of make sure that we keep that provision in place with a meanwhile use, if that's helpful for some other sort of shared mobility, but making sure that we maintain the ability to bring that provision back in.
So what communication is TfL going to produce for Londoners? There are 550,000 Londoners that use Zipcar, me and Seb amongst them. And obviously we've got the luxury of being here in this meeting, but for many people, they are wondering how they're going to be able to make their plans, that's the kind of situation where people who are in a position to afford to buy a car may decide to buy a car, or may decide to buy a car with their neighbours even, and kind of try and do a car share or something, but that's still another privately owned car. So what communication are you going to be providing for those 550,000 people that currently use Zipcar? How are you making sure that Zipcar will enable you to communicate with their users, or at least kind of send out a way of signing up with TfL for updates about car club use? You know, you've got this clock ticking to the deadline of the end of this month, and then if Zipcar pulls out on the 31st, you've got 550,000 current users that then you would have no means of contacting. So are you thinking about how you'll communicate with those people after the 31st of January if Zipcar pulls out?
So, I mean, we obviously don't have a kind of direct communication channel to Zipcar customers because we have no relationship there.
You don't, but Zipcar currently has that communication channel. But if they pull out, then they presumably won't have that any longer. So do you want to make sure that you can, that you at least get Zipcar to communicate with all those users and give an option to sign up for updates from TfL about the future of car clubs? I mean, it just feels like it's an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that's, Seb's just saying, that's something that you can pick up in the meeting with them tomorrow about sort of direct communications with those customers. But again, I think that kind of public comms message is something that will be important for us to discuss as that London-wide group. And I think it is helpful that we have that sort of impetus around that so that we can have a unified message as well, potentially coming from across boroughs and us. So we're all telling people the same thing.
If I may, sorry, I will raise that tomorrow when I meet Zipcar. I mean, I don't know how many users they've got, only Zipcar know that, obviously, and they will have a clear sense of the membership that's affected. Can I use this opportunity just to clear up something that Assembly Member Bakari said, that the Mayor hadn't spoken out? The Mayor is rarely silent, and this is no exception. The 1st of December, Mayor's spokesman, the Mayor's transport strategy is clear on the important role car clubs can play to reduce the need for private car ownership. This is why the Mayor recently announced the electric car clubs with a dedicated parking bay in the congestion charge zone will receive a 100% discount on the congestion charge from July. So just to make it very clear, the Mayor did issue a statement on the 1st of December. Just to follow up on your point about public comms as well, it's also important to remember that in addition to the other forms of transport that do exist for particular trips, PHV hire being a good example. Car hire, of course, in general, there are many providers of car hire, and it is the fact that car clubs provide a level of convenience over and above perhaps traditional car hire models, but that mix of traditional car hire and car clubs does exist. Notwithstanding the departure of Zipcar, that mixture does exist. Our role is to coordinate with the boroughs to understand what we can do to remove some of those barriers, which is what part of the discussion I had with the other car hire companies was about, but also obviously the discussion I'll be having tomorrow with Zipcar. But just to make it very clear to anyone who's watching or listening, clearly there is an ecosystem out there that people can use.
Yeah, I think you made the point, though, that it's not, the convenience of just walking around the corner to the Zipcar that you usually use is absolutely massive, even though it's being used by multiple other households within the network of streets where you live. And that's very different to having to go to somewhere to actually hire a car. And the process of hiring a car is very different. Once you are a member of a car club, the process of using a car is incredibly simple. You've just got to book it for the time you want to use it, and you take a few photos of the condition of the car when you get in it, and you take a few photos when you get out of it. But it's nothing like the complexity of hiring a car. Christina, monitoring of the shared mobility market after Zipcar has gone, if they go. What plans have you got for that?
So we don't have a means of monitoring car club trips. We don't know what they... there's no means of kind of identifying a car club vehicle as opposed to any other sort of car when you're looking at sort of traffic monitoring and modelling. So this is where we are quite dependent on data from operators to tell us about the number of vehicles they've got, where they are, what trips they're being used for. That's really how we can do that. There's no sort of monitoring that we can do just from sort of looking outside in how that works. What we do is our usual kind of monitoring and surveys of Londoners' travel demand. So we know from that you've got about 5% of Londoners who use a car club. So we'll still be able to ask people from their own travel diaries, have you used a car club, for what type of trip. So we'll be able to do that sort of direct surveying ourselves. But in terms of traffic sort of modelling of what trips are being made by car club vehicles, we can't do that. We would be reliant upon operators sharing that information.
Which takes us back to the idea of getting that data from more data from the operators as part of a package of
and that's something we've looked into and asked about before, but I think the feedback has been from stakeholders that would be very complex and the focus should be more on kind of encouraging consistency among the boroughs, which is definitely something we can do, but obviously having that data would be a helpful input into that.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assemblymember Russell. Just to narrow down on that point very clearly, bearing in mind the operators have wanted various things, certainly over the last year, probably longer, certain asks that they've made. At any point, say over the last year, has there been an effort to say to any car club operators, we will look at giving you X, Y and Z if you share your data with us? Has that specific ask been made in the recent past?
Yeah, so I've had conversations with Zipcar over the past few years. I mean, I don't know over what kind of time period we're talking about, but
well, I'm really talking about the last year since we published our report and since we've certainly as a committee been extremely concerned about where this bit of the transport sector is going.
So we've talked to both Zipcar and Como about starting to talk about the themes about these new commitments. So within that, that's like what they need to see from us and what we can offer them and what we in turn would like to see from them. So the kind of big themes on that we've been doing.
I'm really running short of time, so I was just specifically asking.
Okay, but I was going to tell you what they were. So
what?
The 6 things that operators have been saying to us it will be useful for us to have commitments on, and so us offering...
Can you pause, because I'm going to ask, because I'm interjecting at this stage and asked a very specific question because you referenced multiple times that one of the things that's stopping you having a more coherent policy basis for car clubs is that you don't have the data. So I was trying to be absolutely clear about if that's a problem you've specifically tried to negotiate with operators on. And have they turned you down? Is that what you're saying?
Not as a negotiation, no.
No, OK. Would that have been a good idea if that's so crucial for you to have an overall? Because, as I say, you don't have an overall policy that's effective on car clubs.
So it's one of the key themes that we discuss with them, data, as well as engaging, communicating with Londoners, working with boroughs. So it is one of the things that we talk to operators about, but it hasn't been in the form of a negotiation
but they didn't get what they want and you don't have what you have.
Well, we're still developing them. We're still in the process of developing.
Well, you're not with Zipcar, you're not, because this is the point. Here we are in December. The reason you're here today is that we're just about to lose 90% of our car club provision, and the conversation seems to have no urgency and no reflection about how we've got there. I'm baffled by it. So my question is, would that have been wise and could that have made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we can definitely continue to talk to the existing operators about now. I'm very happy to follow any sort of constructive avenue with them that will help us all overcome the barriers and get to a better place.
Assemblymember Moema.
Thank you. Question for Seb. So my question is about the report that Assemblymember Baker has referenced. Why was the proposal for a pan-London action plan on car clubs rejected, in your opinion? And in light of the demise of Zipcar, will you be reassessing this decision? And just to that point about the perceived lack of urgency, given this is happening in 2.5 weeks, what are we going to do to pick up some of the points which seem quite sensible for TfL to develop a strategy for the remaining provision or to fill this gap?
Thanks. So I actually think the 6 recommendations are important. The commitments are important. Hopefully Christine will have a chance to outline some of them, because they do reflect the outcome of discussions that have taken place between TfL and the operators themselves. I think it's also important to remember that this is not some unique London problem. Zipcar has withdrawn from Barcelona, from Brussels, from Paris, from Oxford, from Cambridge, and from Bristol. And this is the last city in Europe where Zipcar have a presence. I don't know what their US operation, North America is. I think they're also in Canada operation is doing. But clearly there is a model that has not worked in either continental Europe or in London or in the UK. So we should remember that we are the holdout, as it were. So it's not a unique London problem. That being said, the report that the Transport Committee issued, I think all of the recommendations, bar the action plan, were followed through on. And I'm happy to be corrected, the action plan was not taken up because it explicitly it operates as if Transport for London were the highway authority and able to enact a lot of the policies on parking, on planning provision and so on. As we know, that is at the root of a lot of the frustration that we all collectively feel. There is a disjointed way in which a lot of policies are drawn up, and I think parking is a good example where I think it would be brilliant, frankly, if we had a much more coherent strategy on parking policy, but we don't. And that's why we need to engage with the boroughs and work with London councils to ensure that we can have more cohesive strategies on things like parking. It's one of many different policy areas, quite frankly, where the division between the boroughs and GLA causes friction. I can think of half a dozen, which I won't list, but there are many I'm sure that you'll all be familiar with. This is a good example. But TfL certainly felt that because an action plan should relate to areas over which they have direct competency rather than something on which they advise and provide guidance and a coordinating role, that's why that particular recommendation was not followed through. However, I believe the others were, but I'm happy to be correct.
Okay, so notwithstanding the fact that TfL is not the highways agency for 95% of the roads in London, it nevertheless is the Transport Authority and has great convening power across the 33 boroughs. And it's fair to say that if TfL were to kind of be a bit more robust in its suggestions for a bit more of a cohesive structure, that boroughs in the main would follow suit. So the conversation before with Richard about differing policies and different fee levels in each borough, some guidance, if quote-unquote a pan-London approach, would be sensible. And there are other examples across the whole GLA family where it may not be within the competence of whichever authority or body it is, but once the guidance is published, it's there and it's considered best practice. I just think that, I don't use the term lightly, but just kind of saying it's not our responsibility, so we're not going to have anything to do with it. I take your point about other cities. However, we're not in those cities. And like I say, I can only go back to the point about really big chunks of other public policy are predicated on the existence of this service in ways that doesn't exist in other places. So maybe they've cancelled car clubs in Barcelona, but they've got trams. So there are more public transport options in admittedly a smaller city, but across a wider area. And I don't know that the way in which London operates, because we're the only megacity in Europe, is so different to other comparators in terms of transport and the impact of outer versus inner London, that I just think backing away and being really quite softly about a solution to quite a big provider, it doesn't feel like it's being taken seriously. I mean, I say this as a non-driver. I can't drive. I've never had a lesson in my life. But it is really, really important I understand that it's really important for the kind of modal mix of balancing between inner and outer London, and some of the other changes that have happened across the city, like bus curtailments or route reductions, really, really impacted. I just think thinking about this in a slightly more holistic way, and I just think kind of filling that gap of what happened in concrete terms in conversation between April and now with Zipcar would be really helpful for the committee to understand that the level of seriousness that it's been taken beyond the 6 commitments to providers.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we disagree about the importance of having a holistic approach. We probably disagree on the level of urgency and energy that you feel has been put into this, but we don't disagree on the need for a coherent approach where possible. The problem is that if I'd sit here and tell you, which I quite clearly do believe, that actually there is quite a lot of robust statement policy that we have at a pan-London level, the MTS being an early and good example of that. I compare it to other cities around the world, around Europe. They don't have the same level of provision of policy support for car clubs. They do have a corresponding problem with car clubs withdrawing from those markets. We've seen it across Europe, and Zipcar is a good example of that retraction. But we do have a very clear policy, both through the messages about the importance of car clubs and the funding support through LIP, and of course all of the toolkits that Christina has been talking about. We do have the mechanisms by which we talk to boroughs and guide them through and encourage them to do what they can for car clubs. Clearly, a decision, if it is taken by the parent company of Zipcar to withdraw, means that we are facing a reduction, as you said, in car club capacity and car club availability. It's therefore, and this is what we're doing, incumbent on us to get the actors together, to talk to the different operators, which we're doing, to talk to the boroughs as well, to ensure that everybody understands what the barriers are to further operations. So I talked about some of the administrative costs, for example. That's not necessarily something that was known to me or to TfL before it was raised directly in the meetings that we're having. We don't know, for example, what some of the barriers, local opposition or local support or whatever it is that the boroughs are facing that might be barriers to further operations. Obviously, the meeting I will have tomorrow will give Zipcar's perspective on the barriers that they're facing, and we'll use that then to determine what conversations we can have. But I think clearly there needs to be a London-wide conversation about what we can do to improve the situation, no question about that. And that's really what the role of the GLA can do in this instance, is to bring the actors together, and that's what we'll be doing.
Just to finish on this, so it does feel like the knowledge and understanding of the barriers or support in each borough is something that TfL should know. If this particular provider and its previous incarnation, Streetcar, have been around for such a long time, it doesn't feel credible that that's not known at this point, 15 years on into this particular partnership. So I think that's what I mean about it not being proactive, it not feeling... I just don't understand why the Transport Authority of London would not know what are, even anecdotally, what are the issues across the 33 boroughs, and be convening boroughs maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, officer to officer, to say what are the issues you're facing across the last 15 years. That's what I mean about we've waited for something to blow up before we've decided to fix it.
Yeah, no, I can understand why it feels that way. I can also assure you that the decision on the 1st of December took everybody by surprise. There was no run-up. There was no series of meetings where Zipcar or the parent company said this is going to happen unless. That didn't happen. That conversation was not what they came to us with. But I don't know, this might be a good opportunity to talk about the 6 areas and the kind of outcomes of the discussions that have taken place.
We're running out of time, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. Do you really want to hear the 6 areas?
I don't need
fairly sure we already knew those.
Just the headline.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think it's probably just worth saying that we do participate in those discussions. We haven't not been having them. So we're part of a shared transport forum. So we do have those regular touch points. And we know that the part of the difficulty is the patchwork and the lack of consistency, because boroughs take different approaches and they get to set their own parking policy and their own fees and charges, and it's different. And we know that that's one of the issues. We're just not necessarily equipped to resolve it. But I take the point that people feel that we should be able to do that better, and we're going to be in that room and we'll do what we can. Very quickly, the kind of themes that we've been talking about are working with boroughs, educating, informing, promoting the kind of good schemes and the good practice and the level of consistency, communicating with Londoners to make sure that they really do understand exactly what they are and how they can use them, and understand that there are alternatives to car ownership there, personal and business travel as well. Engaging with operators, so both on operators and boroughs on progress and any new industry developments, supporting electric vehicles. We heard about that earlier as well, so continuing to support the sustained electrification. That's supported by the approach we've been taking in the EV infrastructure strategy. And data, so that's working with London councils, boroughs and the wider industry to try and really encourage that kind of wider data sharing and visualisation, so that we can have a more informed approach holistically to strategic planning and policy development. That's been ongoing this year.
When those 6 points came out?
We have been discussing them with Zipcar and with Como throughout this year.
So no action being taken on any of those?
We're agreeing them together. We're iterating them and engaging on them.
Okay. Okay, fine. You wanted to hear the 6 points. We heard the 6 points. We have to finish there. I'm afraid. I'm sure we could talk for many, many hours further about that. Just wanted to ask Seb if you could keep us updated on further discussions after tomorrow. And just again, Chair's indulgence, the 3 points out of our report were action in the London plan, which of course has not been actioned because we don't yet have an action plan, so a London plan. The request for an action plan, which would have firmed up some of these discussions a bit more speedily than they are being done, that was turned down. And an awareness campaign, and I think we might all have our own views about whether that awareness campaign has actually been accurate. So I'm not sure that we'd necessarily agree that only one of those 3 has been refused. So just to clarify on that. But anyway, I think we will definitely have to draw it to an end there. Thank you very much to all our guests for our responses today. You are free to leave, or we're just taking another few seconds to wrap up. Can I ask the committee to note the report on the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note its work programme and meeting dates? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 21st of January 2026 at 10 a.m. in the chamber at City Hall. There is no urgent business. Thank you. This meeting is now closed.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please